Welcome to the dark side of the female psyche with Michael Tsarion. Here we will be delving deeply into those dark corners of psychology that few have the courage to acknowledge, the evil that exists within the female psyche. This series aims to offer you viable solutions, resources, and potent insights that can aid you in your rehabilitation and empowerment. But be forewarned, this is a series not for the faint of heart, nor is it for the easily triggered. Rather, it is only for those courageous women who realize the severity of the hour humanity is in. This means if you're going to listen to this series, you need to be ready to take self-ownership over your reactions and your responses. Because while women do hold the power to change the world, the state and quality of that change will invariably be influenced by how well a woman knows her own psyche, how beautiful, honorable, and dignified that woman chooses to become. If you are a woman who is choosing to willfully evolve, if you are a woman who sincerely desires to master yourself, your mind, and your behavior, then the information shared throughout this series will serve you well. Welcome back, everyone, to the dark side of the female psyche. We're here with Michael once again, and this is part 2 in our series on fashionable delusions. So let's go right in. Michael, please go right ahead wherever you'd like to start.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. It's nice to be back. And yeah, I thought we just remember last time we covered part 1 of this incredible book, and it is well researched, the myth of matriarchy and prehistory. It's corroborative. Remember, we said last week that this will be a supplement. I didn't want to cram our earlier programs, but it's very important that at some point we do what we're doing now, which was to supplement some of the key information there so they know that it's not just woolly thinking or misogynistic rants. This book is written by a woman. There are others that started to critique this, what I call a fashionable delusion, which has, of course, been persisted now for a long time. And it's very, very important that people are more active, both women and men, in getting to the roots of feminism and deconstructing it. And I'm glad to see that this is sort of gaining a little bit more traction, even on the internet. Feminism is not serving women in the slightest. In fact, it's leading them away into perdition. So the more critical mind does well to try and deconstruct it. This is the thing with the deconstructionists. They never want to deconstruct their own ideologies, but we have to do it for them. So we take their techniques instead of using it in a destructive manner against the West. We use it against them. This is a very excellent technique to use the weapons of evil against evil itself. And in my opinion, see, it is evil, what's going on. And as we've shown, it has its roots in the very ancient past. I think this is a missing link with what you might call the red pill or the manosphere. It's crawling along at its own pace, and that's very fine and everything. But the scope is fairly limited. It's not going to be enough to just look at what's happening in the now with the wokies and all of that. This thing, everything has its own etiology, right? Its own history, its backstory. And that's what fascinates me the most. And as we said last time, if we really want to get a grip on where things are going to go, then all the more do you need to know where things have been, because things are articulated in this way. Things don't happen spasmodically. And more importantly, if there's been some breaches in the deep past of our history and they've never been corrected, if they've been buried over by time or by malicious intent, then how can you possibly affect a remedy? Things will just continue to fester. Things will continue to worsen. And when you go into the work of the great minds, the really, really great minds who maybe have sort of mused on this subject, they seem to be really aware of this. But even not so great minds, right, in the middle zone, people are starting to realize this, the depth and the weight of the problem, this war against the sexes. Or is it something even deeper than that? Is there something inimical between masculine and feminine? This is what Otto Weininger was looking at. And William Blake were looking at things on more of a metaphysical level to try and uncover the roots of it. And this is what I think is important. So we're making good progress that way. I think what we've done is a key part of the narrative in this by bringing up the past. But just in case some of those ideas sounded kind of wacky and off-center to people, this is why we're looking at Cynthia Eller, her magnificent research, and taking down one of the most important pillars, of feminism, showing where it came from and how utterly unstable it is, empirically speaking. They foisted this on us by consensus. And the ones who believed in it, still today believe in it, do so through some sort of hysterical basis. Right? It's like becomes a mental contagion, a social contagion, a positive illusion that keeps this group together. This is the way it is across the board. Sociologists have noticed this. They're what we call positive illusions. I mean, I wouldn't even call them positive, right? They're really just delusions. But they call them positive because this is what then holds a pretty much antisocial group together. The glue that holds them together, like an ideology, as we'd call it. And we've got all of these ideologies. But why it's important is this. When we uncover these facts, people may go, okay, this is sort of interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. I guess we can just throw the lie, the myth of matriarchy aside then. Thanks for that. But it doesn't really shake up my world that you've proven that that's sort of fallacious. But it should. Because, of course, it's just one more aberration in the middle of so many others. Okay? Look at all the critical Marxism. Look at the other aspects of feminism. Look what's happening in the media, and in politics. So the tools by which you can deconstruct this story of the matriarchy helps you, trains you to be able to do it elsewhere, because you're going to need to be able to do it elsewhere. Look at this whole thing on transhumanism. Look at all this stuff on progressivism, right? And when we had the transformation from, say, orthodox Marxism over to the sort of a cultural Marxist version, which has always been very successful, tomorrow they'll wheel out yet another version. Just because that is winning the world today, once the critical Marxists know that they're being critiqued, they're so slippery and adept. They come up with yet a new version that's even more shiny, and captivating for people. They've already tenderized almost the entire Western female population who vote for open borders, for the soft touch on criminals, including rapists. And they're fawning on cultures that if ever those cultures did get a grip, women would be in a state of unbelievable subservience. I'm talking recently on an episode of Unslaved. I don't know if it was with a guest or not, but when you get this sort of critical Marxism, this Jacques Derrida frowning upon the Western narrative because it's imperialistic and it's it's the narrative of white males and all this nonsense, right? And that narrative is only one of a kaleidoscope of other narratives that need to be brought to the table from all these fucking sludge races of the East. When do they ever tell you, when do they ever remind you what everybody east of Prague knows? that in India and in most Muslim countries, you've got a thing called arranged marriage. Like we've talked about before, the Western mind just couldn't even conceive of the materialism, of the racism. But wait a minute, we forgot to top it off. We forgot to add these 2 points. When do the Jacques Derridas and their disciples ever tell you of this obscenity of misogyny called the arranged marriage, where girls as young as 10 years old are assigned by their fucking parents to marry some ugly ass, thick as shit son, whether she likes it or not, when she comes of age. And probably sometimes it's the arranged marriages even when they're in the preteen situation. But it wouldn't matter. Even if the girl is 18, where's her choice? There's no choice. She has to go through this ritual of a marriage and all the pomp and ceremony, again, all dolled up. And she can't even see her husband's face. She barely knows him. And sometimes it's a pic of, 10 brothers. And she doesn't get the handsome one. She gets the absolute fucking Wally, who himself is often completely browbeaten by his traditionalistic family that is demanding, right, that he do as they say. But even if it is the more handsome son of the family, the one that they're really going to invest in, it's the same thing. The arranged marriage has been going on for centuries. Do they tell you that in Indian community up until the time of the British, conquest of India, a thing called sati, which people can look up, where the wife was obligated by Indian law to burn herself on the funeral pyre of her husband should that husband die? To throw herself onto the funeral pyre and immolate herself was the common habit of wives in India up until a very, very recent time. And that it was only the British government that put a fucking end to that. And all the other feuds. Do they tell you about the Mughal invasion? This is the Muslim invasion of India and the horror of that. It rivals Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. Or Ivan the Terrible. No, I think we can slot in one before we even get to Ivan the Terrible in the West. It's called the Mughal invasion. They kind of want to sweep that under the rug. It's so foul and hideous. They go, oh, look at the Taj Mahal. Sure, I got photographs of that on my fridge. Uh-huh. That was the enlightened Mughal emperor Shah Jahan. Ever want to know about his son, Aurangzeb? And the rest of the horde? What they were up to in India? The butchery? No, you'll never hear about that. And how the British had to respond to that, or various other mutinies, and the feuds between all these Maharajas for the slightest thing. All these uprisings and just unbelievable chaos. There's an old movie from the 60s called Flame Over India with Lauren Bacall. People should watch that. And that's just one. I can list a whole slew of other films that actually are very accurate to go into this. But then on top of this horror story called arranged marriage, which is this lifelong servitude, the West doesn't even know the fucking beginnings of it. Lifelong servitude of a woman who's got to grow to love her husband, meaning love her servitude. Great start, right? No, we're not done yet. Ever heard of a thing called the caste system? Right? The caste system. Employed in India for thousands of years, in which the people at the lower rung were called untouchables and still actually are. In most of India, you have the race called the untouchables, where human beings will not even touch another human. They're considered so low on the hierarchy. They're good only for cleaning up the shit, the refuse. I've been in India, I've seen it with my own eyes. The lack of dignity in these people, the way they're thrown, to the vultures. And these upper class twits, the way they're served. And there's even lower classes than them. Can you believe that when you really get into it? There's even lower classes than on the untouchable. But this is bad enough. You ever looked in the eyes of any of those people? We had a guest on called Jack Cahill, and he was telling us about this, where those men that he knew weren't quite untouchables, but they were very low, right? And they would help the ashram. They were servants of the ashram, and he said that they were the nicest people, but they were completely destitute, bringing grass for the animals and being kicked aside and bullied and never paid. That's India today. It was 10 times worse in the past, 100 times worse, and the West knows almost nothing about it. And then you get these grinning fuckers coming over to our country and pretending to be equally civilized as they ape the white man. And then they start even telling the white man what's wrong with his culture. These are people who endorsed, and probably still secretly do, arranged marriages. The families that come over here, right, are the ones you know. But see, the relatives back in India, they're still all in the arranged marriages. The women have no rights whatsoever and are kept as absolute slaves. And you know who the biggest slave drivers are in those families? The older women and the grandmothers. You see, the West hasn't witnessed it, so they don't know. Movies are not made about it. It's all been swept under the rug. You've got to be privy to it before you realize what's going on. And the beatings and the abuse and the servitude. There's no white people in the whole of the West that know what I'm talking about, how bad it is. They've never experienced anything like this, except in certain psychotic, and I mean, these are absolutely criminal. What I'm talking about would be considered totally and utterly criminal. Yet we're glad handing them out visas and thinking they're all so fucking holy when they get here. Well, they're so high and so religious with their holy books and their beads and their ashes and all the rest. What the fuck? You just take two things, arranged marriage, and you take this caste system, and if you know what you're looking at, you got it down. This lie. And how it is, although on with one hand, it is the most greatest atrocity to younger women, the older women have never spoken up against it. Never. Even though many of them have gone through it themselves. But just because they can have somebody under their shoe to get their own frustrations out, they'll go along with it. The whole thing is warped. And that's why we've got to look much, much deeper. This is only one aberration. But unfortunately, it seems to be that all the error of the centuries is repeated again and again, yet none of the wisdom. That's your problem. How can we change that? None of the wisdom, with all the mighty fucking brains and minds, not only in the West, but predominantly in the West. And we know this because if Western man hadn't gone out to Africa, bringing with him his medicine and his engineering, have you any idea of the Holocaust that would be happening right now? By now, did you know that in Hawaii, there were over 50 forms of fungus to kill off the one resource they've got there, which is sugarcane? And not a single Hawaiian knew how to fix it. It was just hope for the best and pray to the gods. Or maybe, sacrifice a few humans to see if it works. When the white man came to Hawaii and these other similar places, Tonga and other places, they saved the population hundreds of times over by dealing with the fungus that eats the sugarcane alive. And so that culture could thrive to exist into the modern age. And no Hawaiian will ever admit that. Why? Because they've been contaminated by racism, because they've been contaminated by this white hate. And you can go to every single non-white culture and find the same facts. Right? The white man cleaned the water. The white man stopped the maggots from eating into the feet of the children in Cuba. There's a particular bug that eats into the foot because none of the kids even had shoes. They couldn't even get that together. And in India, it's infinitely worse. They brought pasteurization. They brought, all the things that has allowed these millions upon millions of people to survive. And yet look at the ingratitude. So the error of centuries is repeated again and again, but none of the wisdom. So don't ever try to, the listening audience should always remember these things and never, ever doubt what Ayn Rand said. You don't need less criticism. You don't need less judgment. You need more of it. You need to strengthen those skills. And that's what we do here. That's what I do in my work. And I've never looked back. It helped me in my personal life, to get this sharp and to get this critical and this judgmental. And you never want to see those things getting weakened. It will never serve you in the end. But maybe we can start today, sir, if you will, please. We'll pick up from where we left off last time and continue reading some of these incredible slides, please.
All right, so we will be continuing with Cynthia Eller's The Myth of Matriarchal Prehistory. And in this particular quote, she states that matriarchal myth fails completely on historical grounds. Evidence from prehistoric times is comparatively sparse and hard to interpret conclusively. However, even taking these difficulties into account, what evidence we do have does not support the thesis that prehistory was matriarchal and goddess worshipping, or even that it was sexually egalitarian.
Wow. Dynamite. She's talking from a scientific point of view, from real evidence. And she's saying, look, it's just not there. But let's go on.
The question of where the Kurgans came from has a rote answer: the Russian steppes. Maria Gimbutas has brought great precision to questions of the Kurgan homeland. She centers it in southwestern Russia, where the Don and Volga rivers approach one another most closely, extending downward from there toward the northern shores of the Black Sea and eastward towards Kazakhstan and the northern shores of the Caspian Sea. Rhetorically speaking, apart from any archaeological data confirming or disconfirming this theory, this is a terrific place to locate the patriarchal homeland. What is required is a territory big enough to be home to a largish population of marauding warriors, a place from which one can, without crossing enormous geographical barriers such as oceans, reach Europe and the Near East, a region whose prehistory is neither noble nor well documented, and finally, since no one wants to come from the place where patriarchy began, a land that is sparsely populated today. On all counts, the Russian steppes, no man's land, fit the profile. Indeed, there is little evidence that most narrators of the myth of matriarchal prehistory know where the Russian steppes are. Maps are rare in feminist matriarchalist literature, and identifying geographical features are typically vague when given at all. This is a notable omission in works whose entire premise hinges on the existence and spread of a group of conquering warriors hailing from a specific location. Perhaps truer to the spirit of the myth of matriarchal prehistory is Rianne Eisler's frequent insistence that the patriarchal invaders came from the barren fringes of the globe, a place securely off the map of anywhere we might want to call home.
Yes, now these slides come from chapters in which she is debunking this whole idea of the Kurgan invasions and how utterly vague a great deal of it is. This Maria Gimbutas was the one who tried to specify location, but really after her, the books didn't feature good maps and not only spoke in general about this particular wild, wasteland area, but as you saw in the last slide there, even more preposterous references to where these Indo-European horseback riding warriors who destroyed the matriarchy came from. And so this looked like objectively a weakness. It's just too vague. The area is far too big and far too uncharted. But isn't that exactly what somebody who's playing a game with you would pick? Where there are little archaeology. Last time we spoke about the fact that after more critical voices were heard, these matriarchalists shifted the playing field again and started positioning matriarchy in Africa. Remember I said that? In the darkest Africa, where they absolutely knew that very, very, very little archaeology had ever been done. And also would take many, many decades, if not even longer, for it to be done. And that looked very disingenuous. So what this does is it puts us on our guard. Because first of all, as we saw in the previous episode on this, their conclusions, which were really speculations, were done in the infancy of archaeology. Remember all of that? And we saw that it was clearly wrong. The first speculations on the goddess figure and the matriarchy and its inception were actually wrong. We saw that. We're not going to go over it again. It went wrong. And so classic works like Robert Graves's White Goddess or whatever that picked up on all of that did so prematurely. That all the goddesses, were manifestations of one goddess. There wasn't a shred of proof. In fact, we'll look at a little bit more about that today, and we'll show that even more conclusively that no. The ancients didn't think that at all. That was a horrendous leap into speculation. Yet, when the feminists came along, you see, they grabbed that. That was a piece they thought looked good. They weren't critical about it. They didn't really go and look at the empirical evidence for that. And the same thing here. Somebody introduces that these little tribe of Kurgans were just going to fucking hang on their neck now, this albatross. We're going to show some mugshots of these guys. Nobody knows any dick about them. Nobody by this time had dug up a fucking thing. One crazy psychotic woman, Maria Gimpetus, goes out there and says, I found it. Find what? You're letting the facts fit your theory. And she was allowed to do it. Just like Margaret Mead. There was a major controversy there with one of the major anthropologists, And this Maria Gimpetus is the same. But the sad thing is that even people like Joseph Campbell started citing her. Popularizing her, yes. We've already spoken about that in the past. It's not to attribute blame, because of course this was sort of exciting at the time. But like many things that are exciting at the time, in the beginning, they flag later on. But the thing is, do you then know? But has the attention span of the people of the world followed that through to find out? Not a thing. No, they don't. We know this. Look at the YouTube videos. You get viral in the first video, and by the time you get to episode 3, it's fucking 26 views. Right? So this is the same thing across the board. People don't go and check out, like I've done. Where do these things lead? Or what is being said at the halfway mark? All of that, right? So this is spurious. These Kurgans got the blame, and that was it. They were off. The feminists thought, you've done it. It is vague, but doesn't matter. We now can identify where these hordes came from. But as I've said, we've talked about it from the point go. Why? Well, you won't find any why. You know what the best why for any of these invasions are? Something to do with climate change. Something to do with, hostile climate is the best that they can do when they talk about why any of the slaughter would happen. Inclement weather. Are you fucking having me on? Like there's not been inclement weather for hundreds of thousands of years? That only 3,000 to 6,000 BC, 4,000, let's say 4,000, as an approximate BC, then only races should rise up and go and slaughter other races because the weather was bad? Is this what passes for anthropology? With all the movement of all the races, think of the rise of the Jews and the Persians, right? And all of these different races. We know that Genghis Khan slaughtered half of Europe just because he wanted to, have grazing grounds for his sheep. That we understand, but the psychotic mind. But to say that these wonderful matriarchies were only attacked at a very reasonably late date in history, right, by marauders who didn't like the weather. That is the cause of a human genocide that women were, subjected to. But there's no evidence any time before that. Even during the Ice Age? Isn't the weather bad during the Ice Age and at other periods? This is the pathetic answer that they give. And if you knew anything about real catastrophism, you'd know how spurious it is, because the Earth has been through absolutely titanic, right, periods of desertification and deforestation and cataclysm. So once you know more about that actual subject, about climate and climatic disaster and all of that, even this theory even looks less likely, because there's been so many periods of disaster in which you don't find anything like what the feminists are talking about. You see? So they were hoping that you didn't know too much about territorial catastrophism or desertification. Now, just to throw in more background on this, in case people are interested in that thesis, there's a book by a man called James DeMeo called Saharasia, right, for people who want to follow up on that. But the fact is that the feminists never cite that book. So I'm wondering why that is. So Saharasia is a very good book that looks into that idea of climate change and things like desertification in relation to human evil. And even things like child abuse, by the way. It's a very interesting thesis. And James DeMeo was already famous for being a disciple of Wilhelm Reich.
Interesting.
So I'm just throwing that in because I want to have people understand, the fullest scope and what it will take to look at all the evidence, right? In my work, I like to bring all the evidence to the table. So that's why you hear me, citing things like Totem and Taboo by Freud, and the great work of Otto Rank, which is, up to me, absolutely seminal. And on Unslaved, I've done some fantastic work, a few programs on Otto Rank that go into some of the stuff we've already been talking about in this series. But this James DeMeo's book, Saharasia, is definitely worth perusing. In light of, it'll substantiate a lot of what we're talking about, and also help fathom these age-old catastrophes and how they've affected. I guess the thing with that book is that it's going to show you how much these climatical changes have molded the modern world. He's done a great job. And this will even interest people who are worried about Egypt. Like this water damage that you find on the Sphinx, which has affected the aging of the Sphinx, how old they think it is, the rise of the Nile, the rise of the Mediterranean basin, all of that he goes into. And he's one of the people, not the only one, who shows that most of Africa, Libya, all of these northern areas, Morocco, were all fertile within almost living memory. Can you believe that?
Mm.
Oh, yeah. There's tribesmen were alive when he wrote the book in Africa who remember when it was lush. And then this again has interest for those people who are interested in the subject of Atlantis and who think that Atlantis was situated in the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. Well, it might be interesting for, to read his book. It's also going to be interesting for disciples of John Allegro and the whole psilocybin cult, right? The mushroom cult. Because one of the criticisms that when he spoke, they said, you can't get the Amanita muscaria in the very lands of Palestine that he's talking about. Well, read Saharasia. Read the books that talk about the fact that what you don't know is how lush those lands were. And by God, you could. Mushrooms did grow, you see. So this ignorance of the way the world looked. And there's many other books, many other works that show you just how lush the whole Mediterranean basin was, and places that we consider, desert now, like Egypt, like Northern Africa. They weren't like that. There's a book called Before the Pharaohs. I mean, I could just go on, right? By Malinowski, I think his name is. And he's an engineer. And he confirms the same thing. Because they found etchings, they found slabs, they found old pictograms and petroglyphs showing crocodiles and fertile palm trees and rivers flowing and white men with beards in Africa thousands and thousands of years ago before they ever meant to be there. Okay? This has all been covered up. But let's move on, please.
The Kurgans are the star players in invasion theories, but they did not have to patriarchalize the world all by themselves. They had help occasionally from nameless nomads in other parts of the world, but most often from the Semites, specifically the Hebrews. As Elizabeth Gould Davis explains, it was these people, cultureless and semi-civilized, who first upset civilization in the ancient East by overthrowing the city-states and later by dethroning the ancient goddess and enthroning male strife in the form of Yahweh. Feminist matriarchalists speculate that the Hebrews, like the Kurgans, suffered the ill effects of nomadic pastoralism and a harsh climate, but they also accuse the Hebrews of having taken especially cruel steps to destroy goddess religion. The anti-Semitism implicit in this thesis, blaming the Jews for the death of the goddess, has been much commented upon, but the belief that Semitic invaders helped to crush matriarchal cultures is still very much a part of the myth of matriarchal prehistory.
Now, this is a iffy one, but contains seeds of truth. The idea that the Hebrews or the Semites were in opposition against the goddess cults, we've already talked about, and you've seen that I agree with it, because the Old Testament seems to leave you in no doubt about it. The Kurgans, I don't know. Very unlikely. It's very shaky. But because of the Old Testament and other books, you can't dismiss this point. And she knows it. That's why she's expanding it. Of course, they're doing that for disingenuous reasons as well. They knew that if you couldn't actually find later on any proof that the Kurgans did it, it's okay. Some of them expanded it to involve other nomads. It's a nice trick, just in case they were worried. Let's footnote it with bringing in some other people so that we still look credible later on. But in this case, there is a certain credibility because we know from the Old Testament anyway that there was, right, a problem, and that the Hebrews were responsible for stamping out the sacred prostitution, particularly. They explain it. It's not a mystery that they were coming down on these widespread cults. But the thing is that it is completely clearly explained why that happened. It wasn't climate problems. It was debauchery on the part of the women. So she's careful never to mention that. Not Cynthia Eller, but these other writers she's referring to are careful to suddenly omit something vitally important to this whole story. They're trying to tell you there's a crime that's been committed. But by leaving out the reason why the crime was committed, they're committing a crime. Because these acts of the Hebrews were acts of vengeance. The debauchery had reached. Remember we said that you got to understand today's world? Look around at our world today. Look at women today. And you're going to tell me there's no debauchery? It's insane. And women, given their freedom, right? These TikTok OnlyFans generation are quite happy to show you what's going on. And even the cattiness amongst themselves. Well, this kind of thing was going on in the ancient times. And the Hebrews decided at some point to put a stop to it. And with it also went, as we've shown in other programs, this horrendous penchant for human sacrifice. And the sacrifice of babies and children. That's a long, long history, but let's go on.
Reproduction and kinship. According to feminist matriarchalists, the miracle of childbirth, especially miraculous when no male role in conception was recognized, caused all women to be viewed with respect and honor. Strong links between mothers and their children led to matrilineal kinship systems and matrilocal residence patterns, which placed women in positions of social power. The idea that prehistoric peoples might not have recognized paternity was first proposed in the 19th century. From the comfort of their armchairs, several anthropologists speculated that primitives either were so promiscuous that fatherhood could not be determined, or that they were ignorant of the connection between sexual intercourse and conception. This speculation received some grounding in ethnographic evidence when reports filtered back from Australia and Melanesia that certain Aboriginal peoples denied that sexual intercourse had anything to do with pregnancy. Bronislaw Malinowski's reports from the Trobriand Islands engendered even more excitement back home in Europe. As Malinowski stated categorically in 1927, the views about the process of procreation entertained by these natives affirm without doubt or limitation for the native mind that the child is of the same substance as its mother, and that between the father and the child there is no bond of union whatever.
So it's hard to make it any clearer. The greatest experts on this, the ones who were out there talking to the natives, before any kind of Western contamination, so to speak, all confirm this. It is confirmed. And that means that in ancient times, it was very much the same. So now these pieces of, here we are again, right? We've looked at this several times now. And here again, we come across this phenomena. So why is it then that even Cynthia Eller and other writers on this almost universally cannot join the dots? There's three dots to join up here. This ignorance about paternity equals the veneration of woman up to the level of goddess. The phenomena of goddess originates here. That's my proposal. It originates here. It didn't come out of the skies. It originates with this. But the third dot is that the women knew the truth about paternity first and decided to keep it from the man, which then, if you need a fourth dot, is the dot then that says, when man found out about this, there was acts of vengeance. So all these PhDs from all these universities all over the world couldn't tell you this. Not one. Not one is there. And there's no men. In my series on auto rank, I talk about it, and it might be, and I can't even remember. It was a while ago since I made that, so I'm not even sure that he concluded it. Maybe certain aspects of it. But I've never seen it robustly covered. Anybody could have missed this. Even in the 35 years of research I've done, you blink and you could have missed it. It's a forensic case. You have to arrange, all of these pieces in a certain way for it to make sense. And I've just been lucky enough to stumble across it. Also, probably by being highly critical of, like I said, I got a bit suspicious of the narrative. There's a multiplicity of different disciplines, different perspectives. Dissatisfaction with what I'm seeing amongst the sexes today, a deep interest in female psychology, right? There's a lot of different things that have come together to lead in this direction. A working knowledge of Freud and Jung and Rank and people like that. Any one of these parts that was missing probably would never have come across this. So it's just that luck, So yeah, let's call it 4 dots. The concept of a goddess of any kind is very, very likely, right, that it came from this idea that by producing children in and of her own flesh, of her own means, whenever she wanted, gave rise to a veneration that over time increased into a goddess. Now, it doesn't mean that there wasn't other sources of that. I've gone into that in a series on Enslaved called Monstrous Feminine. And I take on the alternative views of why a goddess figure, and they're very, very interesting. I don't know if we'll ever get to talk here, but people can look at I think there's 2 podcasts and 1 premium, and I recommend the premium. I think the subtitle is Goddesses of Blood. I mean, people have just got to watch that. Sign up for even a month and just watch that one program, for God's sake. And that will go into an alternative reason. But I think this one, it doesn't negate this one. Far from it. But then we understand that the woman is the one who knew the secret. And as we said, this was the purview then, this became the secret of secrets that older women knew who were what we would now call doulas, who we would now know as the nannies and the caretakers, and the evil godmothers, the evil stepmother. This is where it all comes from. Remember the hag? They twigged it, and they didn't confide in men the truth. So a deep inequality was already installed into the world, not by men, but by women. This is earth-shattering. Completely overturns feminism, shoots it through the head dead. Absolutely dead, once you know this. Because these screamers for reform and these screamers for equality, isn't this an act of unthinkable violence against the male sex? But then the screamers have covered that up, their acts of violence, by telling you that man is the most violent one. Look at him clubbing the world. Well, ever heard of clubbing the predators, the animals, bringing meat to the table, fighting off fucking adversaries in battle and laying your life down to do it? How are you going to separate the two of those? It's called protecting the woman. But we have had the twisting of truth for centuries. And the modern version of it by these, these suffragettes and feminists, that's just the latest version. There's an atavistic rehearsal of how to stab the knife in and twist it. That's why the world is filled with blood-soaked goddesses and goddesses who devour their own children and all the rest of it. All the cultures have it. All the cultures have it, from Ireland to Norway and Sweden, yeah, to Russia, all over. Every single culture, even in Africa, all over the place. And their strange antics. And then the next dot is, when finally men discovered the truth, then there is this reprisal. But this is something that the feminist was shaking in her boots to reveal. And so a lot of bushfires were lit. And most of the human race has fallen for it. They haven't seen the reason for these bushfires. I've seen through it, but I can't find anybody in MGTOW or the Manosphere or the Red Pill or any of that. I can't find any women who know anything about this. So it's been successful. But these are acts of violence. These are acts of corruption. And so the modern feminist needs to be confronted with this so that they can then, pop the bubble and take personal responsibility and just stop their endless attacks. We can help them stop it, because when the truth comes out, they'll have to focus on this, that they haven't been the keepers of a utopian, cultures of love and light and harmony. Far, far from it.
Yeah.
But let's go on.
The way in which we now understand physiological reproduction as a result of the joining of ovum and sperm was not even in place at the time when 19th century anthropologists first began speculating about the ignorance of paternity among prehistoric peoples.
How amazing is that? It's very recent. So these are the keys. People can use them or they cannot use them. People can meditate upon this and go back and think about it. Yeah. The goddess is a manifestation of a lie. But because it dealt with vanity, and because it snowballed, yeah, it took on all of these different manifestations. But once you understand what we are talking about, then it is sad but true and not obvious why Hebrews or fucking Kurgans or anybody else would have risen up as soon as this secret was out. See, that's what a criminal faces, isn't it? It's the same today as it was back then. Yes, you can maintain a lie. You can go out of your way to do that. But as Shakespeare said, truth will out. You risk something enormous when you take the road of immorality. We're meant to teach our children that. But unfortunately, right, as mythology has shown you, the hag, the devil's disciple, wherever she turns up, is going to put a mask on and pretend that she's the goodly grandmother, the goodly wise crone. And this mythology has already tried to show us. Mythology has already tried to show us. But as I've been saying from my Atlantis book onwards, who the hell pays any attention to mythology? We think it's fairy tale. We mistake fairy tales for mythology. They're not the same at all. And one of the big differences is that in fairy tale, you always have the famous happy ending. And even at the beginning of fairy tales, it's once upon a time in a land far away. You see, you've already displaced it into some fantasy realm. Mythology doesn't deal with fantasy, and mythology doesn't have happy endings. So already a half-wit can see the difference. Mythology needs to be taken deadly serious. And strangely, because it has not been taken seriously by anything like a large demographic of people, right? Well, then one of the factors of that is that they become estranged from their own culture. I think that might be bad enough, but no, even worse. They miss some incredible keys about history because mythology is actually keeping truths in there about history, and you miss all of it. When you're not knowing the mythologies, you miss all of it, and then become susceptible to deception. And then, just like indigenous people always knew, you better honor these mythologies because that's our ancestry. That roots us to who we are. The modern fuckers came along. Oh, that's just all magical child thinking. That's just all fantasy. Is that fucking right? And then look at you. Look what you've made of your culture that you should be blaming them. You lost your fucking roots. If you had, so as I say to these anti-Semites, if you had but 1/10 in your culture of what the Jews have maintained in theirs for all these centuries, none of the problems that you're facing in the West would be in existence. Not any of them. Not one. Not one political problem that you're facing today, which is almost dragging you to the fucking, edge of perdition. If your race had 10% of the gumption and the courage that the Jew has, the ones you hate so much, oh my God, do you realize where you'd be today? But see, they're just too stupid to work that out, even though it's plain in their, face, empirically right there as an example. You think you learn from an example. They can't even learn from an example. That's how fallen the troglodyte level of the West. This is a culture that's committing suicide. It's not about attack from outside. There's something in the heart of the West. And of course, we know that it's the Frankfurt School and it's Herbert Marcuse and that crowd. The long march through the institutions. Look, we know. This hidden hand of control cannot be underestimated. In fact, it's responsible for a lot of things. It's what bankrolls feminism. We've already talked about that, right? The shadow of Engels. And behind that's the shadow of something even worse. So we were admitting that. But unfortunately, even that doesn't exonerate the West. I'm not falling for these external threats. I acknowledge them, but I'm also seeing what mobilized them. Right? And if the white blood cell count is down, expect disease. There's something self-destructive going on. And it's to that we have to look. But back to the point here. These slides are showing you a key, and the viewer can either let it slide and just move right the fuck on, or they can apply it and realize how woman became woman, especially the pathological stuff. We're looking here at the dark side of the female psyche. We're looking at the criminal history of womankind. There's nothing that should stop us. To me, there's nothing controversial about that. It's a subject like any other.
Yep.
And therefore, we found the keys. But having found them now, it's not our problem how many people get enlightened by this. I'm not attached to that outcome at all. That's not what it's about. But let's go on.
Another troubling fact about goddesses as we know them ethnographically and historically is that they do not always resemble the image that feminist matriarchalists stipulate for prehistoric cultures: the loving mother, the giver and taker of life, the embodiment of the natural world. Some goddesses are incredibly violent, and not in a way that suggests the benevolent function of watching over the natural cycles of death and rebirth. For example, an Ugaritic text from 1400 BCE Canaan says of the goddess Anat, "She is filled with joy as she plunges her knees into the blood of heroes." The Sumerian Inanna is also a goddess of war, and, significantly, neither she nor Anat is portrayed as a mother.
Right, look at what she's saying here. A point that we see but never actually observe properly. The matriarchy is always trying to present a goddess in this narrow way of being some sort of harmonious utopian being, fertile, creative, abundant, and so on. The classic mother goddess. But she's saying that the non-mother goddesses far outweigh those who were presented as mother goddesses. And when they not only outnumber them, they are blood-soaked. I've been mentioning this on and on. How does the matriarchalist, explain this? Well, they don't. They just don't. They just hope that you won't put it together and won't look at it. And as I said, this program I have called Monstrous Feminine, Goddesses of Blood, it's the longer premium program on Unslaved, not the podcast. So they're good too, but the premium is going to blow your mind. Because I go into all of that. I go into that more deeply. It's probably one of the best things we've ever done on Enslaved. So it turns out that now we find there's this preposterous narrowing of the focus to a kind of a stereotype of a mother that just is not backed up by history. But let's go on.
Feminist matriarchalists do not deny the phenomenon of patriarchal goddess worship. They suggest that it was pioneered by the Kurgan invaders. But what they are proposing for prehistory is something different: goddess worship that is culture-wide, exclusive, and consistently supportive of women's power and independence. They thereby put themselves in the very difficult position of arguing for a type of goddess worship that has never been seen, either historically or ethnographically.
Right. There you have it. I can't do anymore. If I said these things, I know what the reaction will be. Right? But here's the final support. And the matriarchalists know it, so this is why I say in anthropology as the hard science, they've dropped this whole thing. They've dropped it. We need to know this. These feminists are just despicable. They carry on with it. But science has actually dropped it for this and other reasons. It's really phenomenal. Finally, clever people have followed the trail forensically and found out that there's not a fucking shred. The very first sentence there. Could you read that first sentence again?
Feminist matriarchalists do not deny the phenomenon of patriarchal goddess worship.
Okay, so wait a minute. What? Now they're having to tell you that the goddess worship does extend to men, and not only to men, but the invaders. Stop. What?
Uh-oh.
Now you're admitting first you painted a picture, right? First you give us these snapshots.
Mm.
Talk about fucking AI deception. First they're presenting a picture of these warriors worshiping their sun god, right? Apollo, Hercules, Zeus. Down we go. And crush these fucking women, these snake worshipping women, right? They're always showing us, well, not always, but in Crete, they found the goddess with the serpents. I think it was actually turned out to be only two statuettes. And the matriarchs went mad about that, right? Just because they found two artifacts. But anyway, you have these hordes coming down. Next thing you know, they've done an about face and go, well, these Kurgans were goddess worshippers. We accept that. Excuse me? What kind of fudging is this? So now the marauders, the destroyers of matriarchy, turn out to be actually goddess worshippers and had their own goddesses. Who slipped that in when we weren't looking? And how old has that gone on? And by the way, a little bit of study of the Hebrews. Remember, she's trying to implicate the Hebrews. Well, guess what? What did that show? When your Finkelsteins and other guys went out and started digging up the actual fucking real evidence? The goddess. She's called Asherah. I've done program after program on that in Unslaved. We got one called the Hebrew goddess for people who are interested. My God, Asherah, and by this, the goddess you just mentioned earlier, Anat, that is where you get Athena from. It's the same word. That's where you get the Egyptian Neith, the goddess Neith. And you know what the symbol of the goddess Neith was? A blood red shield and a bow and arrows. Are they peaceful? Later on you get Diana with her bow and arrow. But actually the prototype from which Diana comes is this warlike goddess Anat that you find as Athena, the goddess of war, and Neith, the goddess of extremely violent war. So again, your matriarch, suddenly she's left to go to the toilet. Where the fuck are you? What happened here? Taking a coffee break? They can't get their fucking story right. And what does that tell anybody? When you can't do that, you know that it's bollocks, right? This is when you know that somebody is committing a crime, when the pieces don't fit. And they don't fit to this point, where now even the Kurgan psychopathic slaughterers of womankind are now meant to be, they're accepting that they worship the goddess. Oh, did Maria Gimbutas mention that in the beginning? I don't think so. Because no, a certain kind of picture was being painted at that time. But as you learn more and more about these nomadic people, these ancient people, right, you suddenly discover that all over the world they had their goddesses. Look at the Scandinavian people. It's in all their holy books. The Kalevala, the Norse Edda, the Prose Edda. It doesn't matter what you've got. Look at the history of Ireland. Incredibly fucking warlike people. All had their goddesses. In fact, the goddesses are the fucking warriors. Just read up on the Morrigan. They used to call Morrigan, the goddess Morrigan, Morrigu in Celtic. They say her acorn crop. Her acorn crop was skulls of the dead. And she could transform into a crow that used to pluck their fucking eyes out of their enemies. And she had two sister goddesses, Bave, right? And Fodla, I think it was. And these three were a prototype. And they were all goddesses of vengeance and war. And the particular thing about them was that after the war took place and the enemy had fled, these goddesses would transform themselves into crows and pursue the fleeing warriors and attack them, even when they're running away and surrendered. That's how blood-curdling and bloodthirsty they were. It's all in the Irish mythology. and you get the cider, what's known as the cider, up in Norway, in Sweden. Well, I'm fucking sick. When you hear in Star Wars about the Sith, the Lords of the Sith, that is a Scandinavian word that refers to a cult of women, sorceresses. Okay, there's something going on here. Read your Tolkien's, read your mythologies. Sith is also a take on the word Seth, which is Set, a comet god. And if you watch My Monstrous Feminine, all will be explained about that. There's something been going on this planet regarding women that has been completely scrubbed from history. And it will once and for all, right, obliterate the image we have of women once you know the truth. This mystique and this masquerade. But let's go on.
War and peace. Feminist matriarchalists also claim that prehistoric human societies were peaceful, a claim that is doubtful on both ethnographic and archaeological grounds. Warfare is common in ethnographic contexts at all levels of technological sophistication, and violent death, probably not the result of accident, is archaeologically attested for in many prehistoric populations dating back to the purported matriarchal era. For example, Stephen J. Mithen notes that numerous skeletons from Mesolithic cemeteries dating thousands of years earlier than any proposed patriarchal revolution have injuries caused by projectile points. Brian Hayden reports on mass graves from the European Neolithic containing as many as 700 skeletons, some with arrowheads embedded in their bones. Some archaeologists have even theorized that certain skeletal features from Minoan Crete indicate human sacrifice.
Yeah. So this is in the period, right, Mesolithic period, when the goddess traditions are meant to have ruled the world. But again, it's just not backed up. They draw a line and say, here's the time when the goddess ruled, and here's a time when the goddess, world was smashed by these marauders. No, doesn't work. Back long before the dates that they presume, right, that they propose for the rise of violent patriarchs, you already find mass graves, evidence of wars and battles, cruel, stuff all over the world, from Americas onwards. So wait a minute, what happened? How did they not know this? But let's go on.
The art of Minoan Crete is certainly beautiful, but the divinity of the figures pictured is uncertain. And again, we must ask what effect any Minoan goddess worship might have had on human women. The evidence of seal stones indicates that hunting and combat were thought of as male activities, which is not suggestive of a peaceful cultural ethos. And though the frescoes show an unprecedented intermingling of the sexes and significant freedoms for women, they are no more than what we are accustomed to in our own culture, one which, according to feminist matriarchalists, is patriarchal.
Yeah, and again, that's it. Where is the evidence? When they turn to examples, you know that they've used smoke and mirrors. Even in the Minoan culture, which is meant to be where these effigies of the goddess with the serpent came from, and where a lot of these matriarchalists focused their attention on Minoa and Crete. Yep, sorry. Later digs showed, and later pottery images showed, that the man was dominant all the way, and that there was hunting, and there was war, and there was acts of violence. So as we say, we're just substantiating our original point, and substantiating why science and anthropology has basically dropped this like a hot potato. Let's go on.
Weapons have been discovered in many Paleolithic and Neolithic graves in Europe and the Near East, particularly in those of men. Gimpetus repeatedly insists that no weapons except implements for hunting are found among the grave goods in old European burials. At times, she goes further to say that there were no weapons produced at all by old Europeans, or at least no lethal weapons. But if the technology exists to hunt deer and pigs, and to slaughter domesticated sheep, goats, and cattle, then the technology exists to kill human beings who are merely large mammals like the rest.
Yeah, I mean, how do you draw a line? No sane person would. So these are psychotic women, either caught up in the vanity of being getting attention, you know. It's happened many, many, many times. There's even recent cases of this. Uh, there's been court cases where women have been fined millions of dollars and jailed for years, right, for acts of fraud like this, in this and that case. And so this, as I've always said, these Maria Gimbutuses and all, no, very, very crafty, very, very clever. Margaret Mead, Joketa Hawks. It's actually more than we could know. And of course, by doing this, they have left a trail for later generations to follow. And when you consider also the deadliness of the predators that did exist, it wasn't just some thing about sheep and, all of this. The story of predators is another one, let me just pause to say, has really not been told. Right? There's a program I have, another premium called Blood Rights. Blood Rights. People should watch that. Just sign up for a month and watch Monstrous Feminine and this Blood Rights. And that's based on the work of a female author called Barbara Ehrenreich. We can't spend time here to go into detail of what it's all about. It would just take far too long. Because again, I have my own take on these things, right? I don't just read chapter and verse from these writers. Their focus may be very narrow. And the implications of what they're saying, the reader may not realize it. So my commentary is what's important. Right? You have the evidence that they supply, but then there's this other commentary that I bring to the table that will help expand the scope of what some of these writers are saying. It's crucial. But Blood Rights, yeah, highly recommend that, because you're going to see something again that's been scrubbed from history that has the most extraordinary relevance for all the subjects that we're touching upon and even more. And I think one of the things that it will do is it will erase this idea that there was really this great difference in, say, violence between men and women, that the man had it all and the woman didn't. That's what I mean here, right? So if you watch Monstrous Feminine and you watch Blood Rights, you'll understand that the women were equally, if not even more, rapacious, violent, and warlike than men. So this is a huge, missing chapter that's been torn out of the Book of Life. And as you and I have talked before, then in some of these people, these experts, in the next breath, they'll wax lyrical about the Amazons, as if they're just an anomaly of Asia Minor. Actually, they were a branch of the Scythians, the Scythians, right? And they were known also to there was actually Amazons in northern Africa. And it's also all true that these were ferocious hunters and ferocious killers. And you didn't want to mess with them at all. And some of these feminists can't, when they read about the Amazons, they love it, so they can't help but talk about it, not realizing that they probably shouldn't, because it's going to contradict the other stuff. But these are psychotics. These are schizoid people, the schizophrenics. They can't get their own story straight, and they're just hoping that you won't be able to find it out. And you've seen that in Africa, people have dreadlocks. Right? Dreadlocks became a popular thing. That is where the idea of the Medusa with the snakes in her hair came from. Originally. And the only ones who had it were Amazons. Amazon warrior women would mat their hair like that just to keep it out of their eyes. And so later on, when they confronted other groups, in war, the enemy would write that here come the snake-headed women. They're fucking crazy, right? These maenads. And there's even a rumor that they had similar groups, not quite the same, but similar, in the early years of the Persian. And the Persians and the Scythians can hardly be, Persians, Iran, and the Scythians are almost indistinguishable. And they had a goddess called Sataniel. Can you believe this? Sataniel. And this is one of the most fearsome, blood-soaked goddesses of evil. That's where the word actually comes from. How many people have told you this? We've been handed so many lies. The original Satan, was a female in the Persian mythology, and she was known as the Lady of the Lake, who lived in the waters. And it's only when later Sarmatians got to England, because they were brought in as mercenaries, that they brought with them some of these myths, and that's how you get it turning up in things like the Arthurian legend. And Lancelot's mother being the Lady of the Lake. And she was called Nimue or Vivian. But as a matter of fact, she's just a personification of the Persian, Scythian, Sataniel. And no one in the Persian knighthoods, and they were knights riding horses with lances, long spears, and shields. Well, in order to be initiated as an advanced knight in the Persian Empire, you had to swear allegiance to Sataniel. And when you did, on your shield, you would wear the head of the Medusa, which you may have seen if you're familiar with early artwork. And sometimes you would even have like some sort of a dragon motif, like a serpent. But the serpent, whether it had sort of 2 legs type thing, was amphibious or whatever, any of those images of a kind of a serpent or an amphibious creature, just like you get on the Starbucks logo today, that's Sataniel. Just letting you know. And you'd be going near the lake, and you go through your initiations, you see, and then you receive your weapons. And those weapons were not sanctified. You could not use them in war unless the goddess had initiated them, blessed them, and given them to you. Like I said, Neith. If you look into the symbolism of Neith in Egypt, it's all explained. I have a program called Female Illuminati, 7-hour program that goes into a lot of this symbolism as well, that it can be seen on Unslaved. Must add that as well. And I talk about all these goddesses, right? But that all was covered up and turned into a fucking fairy tale. But as I told you, when you ditch the fairy tale and go to the mythology, it all stands revealed. And so the Sataniel had her female ministers all over the Mediterranean and even into Africa. So when these fucking matriarchalists try to tell you about goddess cults in Sardinia or in Crete or Lesbos or wherever the hell they place them, they're leaving out as much as they should be putting in. These are outcrops not of some utopian matriarchy, but these are where the disciples of Sataniel have set up shop. These would have been the early version of the Vestal virgins, for instance, or the Sibyls, because they're all high, right, on cannabis and mushrooms. Now, the thing that John Allegro brought to the table, and that's why he had to be suppressed, is that the cap of the Amanita muscaria, which was the most common drug that they were all using at the time, is so bitter and spicy that when you eat it, it drives you insane. It drives you into a mad frenzy. And so he, and maybe 1 or 2 other clever writers, discovered that when you hear about berserkers, when you hear about Amazons going wild, when you hear about the tearing of, up of the bulls by the Maenads, when you hear about the dismemberment of gods like Dionysus and of I think it's Adonis, or the tearing of testicles, or even Osiris being severed into many, many, many pieces, this is what you're dealing with. Female cults, like the Eleusinian. Some of them are very decorated, covered up, so you don't realize this. But the Bacchanalia, the Bacchantes, tearing Orpheus, even ripping his head off. You wouldn't believe what this fucking shit has been going down in the mythologies. And so, in some strange way, the chivalric male, the knight, we've already talked earlier, you and I, about the troubadour tradition, it's all the same thing. All comes out of this Persian original, where your horse was sanctified, where your weapons were sanctified, where your shield carried the emblazoned image of the goddess in her serpent form. And what you were doing was, when you attacked an enemy, and this is the clincher, You were trying to be as wild and fearless as the goddess that you served. By the time this crap got to fucking England, it's like the knight receives the maiden's favor, which turned out to be a little scarf, a little tissue, a little, scarf that she'd wrap around the phallic lance, and then he'd carry her favor. This is how it all got weakened later on. You wouldn't believe what's behind that. It got turned into Hollywood. The knight bowing his lance and the lady putting this garter on it, or mostly a scarf, all this. Nobody's going to tell you where it all comes from. He's riding the battle or in the tournament in her name. But she's Sataniel. Go out there and fucking chop them to pieces and bring not the meat home, but the blood. I want their blood on my altar. And you're the chump who's going to put your fucking, I want either your blood or their blood. Understood? That's your matriarchy. That's your goddess tradition. Unvarnished, uncensored. This is the XXX version, but it's the true version. And they've done the devil of a time to try and cover it up. And I'm just starting. The real story is even fucking worse. You've got to go and watch those programs I just mentioned. So the next time you see somebody with dreadlocks, just you'll know what they don't know, where that all comes from. Because these were the hordes of the serpent goddesses, right? Ferocious, fearsome. They'd even cut their own right breast off so that their bow arm wasn't impeded. Got it? It's all in the artwork. It's all in the histories. You can shove this in the face of your stupid TikTok feminist. Let's go on.
The Maya, whose cities were completely unfortified, were long thought to be an unusually gentle, peaceful people living in a relatively benign theocracy. But as the Maya writing system began to be deciphered, and as new excavations were undertaken, a different picture emerged. Archaeologists found depictions of severed heads and bound captives and unearthed dismembered skeletons of sacrificial victims under public buildings. As archaeologist Arthur Demarest concludes on the basis of this new evidence, the Maya were one of the most violent state-level societies in the New World.
Now, this one's important because of the thing called fortifications that you just read. Maria Gimbutas made a big deal about this, and she turned out to be uber wrong. When they looked at some of these villages and townships that they thought were the matriarchal, in these different communities and islands, the first thing they noticed was that they were not fortified. Now, as a matter of fact, she also lied a lot. Some of them were actually fortified with ditches. But in general, they didn't look like proper fortifications at all. So immediately, her and her disciples and cronies all start using this anecdote very strongly to point out that there was no war. They took a risk. The non-fortified encampments that they, focused on, these communities, it turns out that no, that doesn't mean anything to do with whether peoples that lived in them were warlike or not, just because they were fortified or they were not, that they appeared to be not fortified. So this is what was also torn down later on. That just because a community didn't have a clear fortification wasn't, as the feminists tried to say, a sign that they knew nothing about war and that they were peaceful. And this anecdote about the Maya, those villages were all unfortified, not even ditches, nothing. And yet, evidence found, oh my God, you can't even imagine how bloodthirsty, right, these peoples were. So that one went down the tubes as well. I just wanted to mention that. But let's go on.
Feminist matriarchalists are in a difficult position when confronting ethnographic and archaeological evidence. What they most want to find in prehistory is the absence of things with which we are all too familiar: sexism, warfare, and environmental degradation, among others. And it is much harder to prove the absence of something than its presence.
Wow, you see the trouble they get into? They made more work for themselves. It's harder to prove an absence than it is a positive, a presence. So the thing was really doomed for the start. You can't proceed in science trying to prove an absence. You just go round and round and round. And what you'll do is to break the first rule of science, which is don't fit the facts to your theories. Right? You've got to rely on the facts. Then you develop your theory. You don't develop the theory first and then get the facts to fit it, which is exactly what they did. And this is where they made the mistake. Later science, I repeat again, has discovered this faux pas and mostly dropped this. But the trouble is, the media doesn't let you know about it, and feminism still rolls on, you see, trundles along, and this has not reached the public ear. So a great deal of the feminist debates and narratives that you still get will cite these people. It will still use it as if nothing's ever happened right now. You know, on websites, on blogs, and even in physical podcasts and other debates online and things like that. This information is not that well known. Let's go on.
Paleolithic Venus figurines. The first representational art we have knowledge of consists of small statues of females. Those who first excavated these statues named them Venuses because they vaguely resembled the classical Venus de Milo with her missing arms. The Venuses have been found across a very wide geographical belt running from southern France to Siberia, but are concentrated in a few sites in France, the former Czechoslovakia, and the former Soviet Union. Many cannot be dated with any great precision, but increasingly scholars are coming to believe that the majority of the figurines were created within a few thousand years, possibly from 23,000 to 21,000 BCE.
Yeah, and that's approximation, right? Nobody really knows for sure. Now, why this is important is because this is one of the biggest areas, the artwork, that the feminists have rested their case on. This includes cave paintings as well. But these figurines, remember I told you the ones about the goddess with the serpents, these sent them into a frenzy. And they immediately started to identify these figures with fertility, often preposterously so. And again, they went a little bit too far. And in the very obese ones, they were telling you that just because the buttocks of these figures were round and robust, they were fertility symbols. And even some of the matriarchalists, sort of were like hesitant to do that. And so there's a whole sub-study of these figurines, what purpose they were. And immediately, that's why you call them Venus figurines, is because the matriarchalists already got in there and said that that's what they were. They were goddess figures. But some of them are very, very unanthropomorphic, right? With very tall necks and no heads, and don't look even like women at all. A great many of them don't have heads or faces at all. And it even can be quite phallic. We've just had a guest on who was talking about this in regards to Amazons, right? His findings. And so you get a wide variety. And it seemed that there was a rush to immediately start saying that these figurines were effigies of the goddess. Is there another slide there?
We have 3 left.
Okay, let's go to those.
Okay. Though they are customarily classed together, the Venuses are not all alike. Some are clothed, others naked. They are carved in a variety of materials, including bone, stone, and mammoth ivory. And though generally small, they vary in size from 3.7 centimeters to as much as 40 centimeters. From the time they were first discovered, Paleolithic Venuses were classified as fertility fetishes or goddess figurines. This basic interpretation of Paleolithic Venuses, that they are religious in character and concerned with fertility, has been remarkably persistent among archaeologists, though it has been losing ground over the past few decades as feminist archaeologists have critiqued it. In the absence of a prehistoric Rosetta Stone translating prehistoric symbols into some language we can understand today, we are, of course, welcome to pore over the art of prehistoric cultures looking for internal patterns, just as Gimpetus has done. We may find things of interest, but none that can stand as the conclusive interpretation of these images. It is unfortunate that prehistoric art cannot tell us more about how women were regarded in prehistoric societies, or how they lived their lives, but the evidence of prehistoric art is simply inconclusive. It tells us that women existed, and that people in prehistoric societies chose to represent them, usually in stylized or abstract forms. It tells us that then, as now, women seem to be depicted more often than men. But beyond that, we are given precious little information about the status of either divine or human women in prehistory. It shows us nothing that would contradict the alternative hypothesis that male dominance flourished throughout the prehistoric times from which these works survive.
So those few slides there show you just how weak it turns out that phenomena is. The cave paintings, these figurines, yeah. Now, don't forget that before these Paleolithic ones, maybe 20-something thousand years ago, those are the ones that remained because they were made out of stone. There may have been many, many thousands more made out of wood, but of course they will never last anything like as long, you know? So they are an anomaly. They are an anomaly. And as soon as the matriarchs found it, these matriarchalists, they were bound to leap on it and think of them as being goddess figurines. And that's all right, as far as it goes. But as Eller is saying here, that is about as far as it goes. You can't really go much further. On cave paintings, when men are shown, they're always on their own, and they're just basic stick figures. When women are shown, they're usually never shown alone, but they're always shown in groups. And they do have a little bit more detail, you know, in them as far as it goes. But apart from a few things like that, there really hasn't been enough from the artwork. She has a whole chapter on this, in which she is pretty disparaging of this and shows you just how utterly weak the evidence is. And as she's saying there, it doesn't contradict one bit. It doesn't really contradict the opposing theory that men were the dominant, groups. In other words, the idea that there were matriarchal groups and communities is not supported by these effigies. Nor can you then prove from those effigies that any kind of matriarchal group, should it have existed, was a benign one. It's not as supportive as people thought. And she has one line in the book, only one line, that backs up what I've always thought about these articles, because they're of their size, generally speaking, is I think they were dolls. I think they were toys for kids. Just like we have today. That's all they were. They were not goddess figurines. They weren't Venuses. They were something that a little child could fondle. It's as simple as that. They didn't have a religious connotation. They were toys. And probably the vast majority of them were made from wood. Now, one of the other things that supports this is that the vast majority of these figurines were found in garbage dumps. When they dig up refuse.
Yeah.
This is where they start finding these figurines. If they were sacred goddess figures, do you think that they'd be found amongst the trash?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? No, these were things that could be used and thrown away, and then daddy would carve another one. A better one, a bigger one, whatever, in fact, there was too many of them, so many of them just were thrown away. In hunter-gatherer tribes, were moving all the time, so they were just thrown by the wayside. They were of no actual value. That's how trivial they really were. So here again, you've got a bunch of presumptuous feminists grasping at fucking straws, not thinking logically. And basically turns out to be the same with the cave art. Nothing there was really of a big help. You know. So I think next time there's a few more passages from her book that are worth looking at. So I think we can do one more program, perhaps. I'll double check, but you know, just to have this part nailed because of how it's substantiating things. So the facts that we've discerned from up to now is that no, there's no way that we're denying that there was a goddess cult. What we're denying is probably how old it went back. That has become more fudgy. 25,000 years, okay, but was it 100? Was it more? The figurines are really no help. They only date from about 20,000 years. And maybe those images weren't even of goddesses at all. They're not Venuses. Right? So if there was the worship of the goddess, it's actually not clear how old that really does go back. Was it the millions of years that other scholars have talked about, like this imbecile Matthew Fox? Or actually any matriarchalist. Any matriarchalist is, of course, going to really relish the idea that this came from the dawn of time. They're not going to, we've already seen slides to that effect. They wanted to go back to even before the Paleolithic. But actually, that's a little shaky. Because some of the evidence that they are presenting for that turn out to not even be images of the goddess at all. But my point is this, even if it does go back 100,000, 200,000, 250,000, remember we saw the Monica shoe, they couldn't get their dates right?
Yeah.
But even if it does, our question is not that. Our question is, upon what was it based? We're asking, how far back does the lie of paternity go? And it seems to be just a footnote in all these other books, even in Cynthia Eller. Unfortunately, the conclusions are not drawn properly as I would like to see them drawn. She's presented those truths, those facts, but has not drawn the essential conclusions from it. It's not how far does goddess worship goes back. It doesn't matter. It's how far back does the crime go. And once you've understood that that is the thing you need to study in the laboratory, you'll find its modern application. Because the further a thing goes back in time, the more atavistic power it has on the human psyche. That's what we're really looking at here, you and I, the dark side of the female psyche. So any years that you add on to a crime, that's gone back to the dawn of history, well, then the more it's etched as an engram in the psyche, more power. And the more power it has, the less anybody can do anything about it. Know thine enemy. If this is so ingrained, and it was only in the latter day that from a fluke, the power of the goddess, the power of the female was overthrown. Do you think that in just a few thousand years, that's enough time to have gone by for it to really have been erased from the collective unconscious? I sure as hell don't think so. I've seen no evidence of that. I've seen evidence of nothing but the contrary.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Speaking as a woman, I can agree.
Yeah. This is the danger. And this is the factor, up until now anyway, nobody else has got this. And when they do get it, I'm not that impressed until I see how they're going to actually, if this falls into the hands of real misogynists, the same information we've been talking about, do you think I'm going to be happy about that? If that's the narrow approach they're coming from, and there's a very good chance that that'll happen. It's not altogether guaranteed that this will fall into the hands of people who know how to use it, this information. That's why it's taken me so long to want to, we did it on slave, that's safer.
Yeah.
Okay, but the time has come because things are getting too bad. You've got to take these risks.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee that sane men in a right framework, a right disposition, can take up this information and, you know, relate it sanely. And that'll just make the whole thing even worse. It'll just be a nightmare. And also, there's just quite a lot of information that one has to bring to bear as well. But this atavistic thing, regardless of who's going to use it, it still needs to be got out to the world. I can't stop because it goes, oh, well, you know, I can't worry about the who's going to use it tomorrow and pick it up. I can't let that stop getting this information out. That would be even dumber. That would be a neurotic worry rather than a sensible one. But it's out of my hands. I can't do anything about it anyway, can I? What do you want me to do? Go and troll them? They just go, get the fuck out of here, Tsarion. You don't know anything, even though you've created all this. I'm not going to get into that RG bargy nonsense.
Fair enough.
So since I can't do anything about it, they just have one us just to proceed along these lines that we're doing. And given the nature of the internet, the likelihood is it is going to get out. That's just, I mean, there's nothing else that's ever not got out. But that's not in my hands. I'm not taking the blame for that if it's misused. We've joined up those 4 dots. And in the end, you see, as Shakespeare said, truth will out. The Bible says it. Truth will out. It cannot be buried forever, no matter what. It's the healthier thing to have the truth out, even if it causes a fucking ruckus. And then the truth is out, so then you say, okay, the main person in the crosshairs is the female. Can women do what men do or don't do is really unapplicable here, as a matter of fact. At the end of the day, that is hardly going to matter. Because the criminal is the one that needs to then face, you know, the problem and make amends. At the end of the day, there's no, it's like a delinquent child who's been expelled 25 times from a school. Are you always going to blame the school? Like the kid wants you to blame the school? Or finally, I mean, can you believe it? Finally, after 20 times expelled, is anybody going to say, hey, what about the kid? So in the wreckage, the phenomenological wreckage of our world, how many women, and I actually happen to believe there's a lot that have the guts. I know it. So this is not altogether a futile thing. It'll be a learning curve. It'll be tricky. But I believe that there is also something else going on. There's a will to meaning in people. You know, a will toward truth. When a critical mass is reached. And I also know that truth has its own mysterious power that no man can give it. Truth has its own way of working in the world. Now, of course, it'll be a come down because we're talking about not just an individual stereotypical vanity, which of course has always ruled the female world. That's how you get the female world of cosmetics and all the rest of it. That's an obvious statement. But it also has this atavistic history. And this is the reason then why men have, you know, been happy to enter into this chivalric mode in relation to women, pathologically, compulsively, whether it was in the troubadour tradition, you know, or the Victorian era, or in some other, like I said, these knights in the Persian realm. Let alone other concepts of eunuchs and castrati, you know, it's been pretty overwhelming. The history of even the male world must be seen. Look at the galley. What do you think a priest is? I mean, what the fuck are we talking about here? Priesthood from top to bottom and inside out. Even the Hebrews, even the original Jews, their entire concept of the priest came from this. All had to do with semen and sacred prostitution. The whole temple, the design of the Temple of Solomon leaves you in no doubt about it. This thing was totally orgiastic before it was purged. But the thing is, it was purged. So there are precedents, you see. But it crept back later. Some of the cabals within Judaism, within Christianity, within later things, went back secretly. That's what secret societies are. Some of them lamented the loss of this side because it involves a kind of a power and also a kind of entrainment of the human mind.
Yep.
And all these bloody bishops and cardinals are dressed the way they are and all the rest. It didn't quite get purged, sadly. This Catholic Church has kept it alive and well, the fourth sect. This thing is labyrinthine, right? But sitting around in your armchair waiting for it to just implode, yeah, this is wrong. Yeah, it's a lie. And it's nice to think that one day, because it's a lie, it'll just fizzle out on its own. No. More conscientious people can't wait for that.
And I also feel it's not I think a transgression against natural law to just sit and wait it out. That's not like the proliferation of rot doesn't go away on its own.
Yeah, it's my feeling. It really is.
Same.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. So this idea that any kind of goddess tradition, it doesn't matter how ancient it is. That's an interesting subject, but it doesn't really ultimately matter. The idea is what kind of lie was it based on? So when you get these Medusan type figures in mythology, and you get them a lot, much, much, much more than any kind of benign mother goddess image. And when you get the crone, and when you get the Amazon, right? And witches and all of that kind of stuff, there's a fusion taking place. Mythology is trying to show you something that needs to be deciphered. And then even when you get a thing called female mystique in more of its familiar mode, is there still in that an abuse of sexuality and beauty? And I think there is. In some mythologies, you get your evil stepmother, okay, and that's all fun and everything. But what about the beautiful woman walking around today? Where's her head? You know, and the delight that she must feel when she's got a horde of chivalrics running after her. And she can trap them because it's a no-win situation for them. She wants their pursuit, but she doesn't have to give up anything. But if a man doesn't pursue her, doesn't fall for her wiles, she'll destroy him. She'll report him at work because he didn't succumb. He dared to hold the moral ground. She will find a way, like these HR departments, to fucking destroy him. But if he does go for it, like the chumpa that he is, right, and goes to bed with her, she'll be fucking telling the world that he raped her the next day, just when she's in a bad mood. Do we need people like that running around in positions of power? Where heads they win, tails you lose? Because this is happening on a daily basis. So I don't want to know about the Russians and the Chinese under the bed. We're committing fucking suicide. Letting people like this, operate. They're anti-intellectual. They're anti-historical. Of course they're going to be anti-historical. Who wants to look back at this, where the archive of their crime is? They're going to want to snow job that over. They're going to want to cover it up. And the first time that they actually showed a fucking interest in history, this is where they went. All the things we've just talked about. This is where they went. A massive delusion, a fashionable delusion, injected with more lies every decade. What a fucking track record. But the real archaeologist, the one who's studying the history, not in this duplicitous way, with an agenda, to lead the people astray or give them a false impression about myself. No, the one who really does it meticulously, right? Brushes off all the dust of time and brings things into the fore. Then you see the real picture, and then you can decide. That's why I keep telling people, go watch The Monstrous Feminine, go watch The Female Illuminati, go watch Blood Rights. Find out what's really been going on behind all of the smokescreen stuff. And only then, when you have a full grasp of the real histories, then you'll be able to, link back your fairy tales, like I said. Many of the mythologies will start making sense now. Tristram and Isolde. Wherever you look, you'll find the same motifs. Who's the evil witch that gives them the love potion that for 4 years drives them into madness, and that in the end brings the whole of the round table to perdition? Huh? It's a woman. Why would they write that? What is a banshee? What is a cider? Or a sheeder? What is a witch? Where did that image even come from? Okay, there's all these questions. And so then when you peel it all off and get to the real roots of it, it's at this point then the individual can decide. Nobody can decide for them. And that's why I said about the book Saharasia, right? There's all sorts of angles. So if you're going to refute this, by all means do so. But do it with some bloody robust facts. Things that can really be argued for. But to try and tell us that the problem with climate change causes only one sex to radically change. I'm going to fall for that. Only one sex is discomforted by bad weather, but another sex isn't affected at all. Right. I'm going to accept this. It's total nonsense. But this is what a criminal will do in order to attract your attention just when you're turning the handle of the door. Just when you're about to go into the Aladdin's cave and have it really good, somebody calls you over with a big grin. Hi, could you come and help me tie my shoelace? And that's all it takes in life. That's all it takes to be distracted. And this can happen on a monumental scale, as it has, with these fucking communists, these critical theorists. Right? They're just destroyers, but they've learned 100 ways to get you to feel guilty, to riddle you with guilt, to overstate when crimes have been done. But if you guys are so interested in fucking the crime that's been done, why are you letting all these criminals out of prison? Why are you giving them the soft soap to some of those most psychotic people on fucking death row? If your interest is that, why are our streets filled with gun-toting criminals? And why so little done, even when you are catching them? 35 fucking arrests, and you're letting them out on the street. I thought you were interested in crime. Running around telling the crime of the white man, the crime of the white man, the crime of the white man, all over the fucking place. The same people who are going soft on criminals everywhere. Ones that have absolutely no rights. Psychotic jailbirds who've been, criminals since they were pre-teens. These are psychotic women all over these coastal elites who are leading our world into perdition. Is there something inherently within them? And is it even possible then for a change to take place? This is the hard question. That if women were presented with all of these things, what are they going to do? Just giggle it off? So what? Haha, we made a mistake. Or just continue to rack up which they've done, right? Take Polaroids of men's infractions and just keep wheeling that out again and again. They don't know any other way, actually. They're so conditioned, so entrained to look at everything that man does with microscopic, eyes, and just constantly blame him for this and blame him for that, even when the blame is contradictory. First you're doing it, but then I blame you for not doing it. You get them into these catch-22 no-win situations. Right? Now what's that called? That's called committing suicide, because at some point their enemy, man, is going to realize what's going on. He's going to learn these traits as they're learning now. I don't think it's a good thing that people should learn this from some psycho like Andrew Tate. But if that's what it takes, if that's what the world is going towards, then nobody can stop it. It's the woman who is the blame for that. They're throwing up these fascists like Nick Fuentes and others who think Hitler was a great guy. You see, this is all caused by the women's intractability. You're forcing more and more radically, loud, obnoxious males to come up because you won't listen to it. You won't get the truth from more benign sources. Even Douglas Murray, who's gay, has been writing about these things, hoping to waken up women. Nobody's listening to him either. So it gets hardened, more toxic as time goes by. Because the person's, the brickheads just won't accept responsibility until it's way, 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 way too late. And then, as I'm saying, I don't know even if there's even the cognitive, it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. First, I said there are a lot of women who might be able to get around this. I still think there is. But the majority of the women, especially those who've been educated in colleges, they're not going to be able to have the introspective ability, the reflection, to look inside their own souls and say, what is this man hate that I carry around? What is it I find so reprehensible? Has it got any substance behind it? What's going on? See, because it's entrainment. And women being the ones who don't want to rock the boat and who are more collectivized and are full of this suicidal empathy, I don't know even if they have the tool set. Now, it's not saying that some won't. I mean, look at these Camille Pallias, these women I worship and think are fucking fantastic, who've taught me a lot. But they are not, these Heather McDonald's and people like that, but they're not the norm. These Ann Coulters, and there's a whole list of these people. And they're doing some great work. So it's an open question. But then the idea is that you say, okay, what can I just bring to the table that is of value and isn't born out of any kind of misogyny? Because I'm worried about what women are doing to themselves. And if now they've awakened what can only be described as, a demonic force within them, the anima itself is on the rampage. Believe you me, it's not going to be easy to fix. Not at all. It may have gone too far.
It's interesting we're talking. Oh, sorry about that, Michael.
Well, that's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's interesting we're even talking about this right now with Pluto and Aquarius, because I think of in traditional astrology, Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. Saturn being ruled by our ruling Capricorn as well, which is calcification, society, and our conditioning around all of that comes from culture and society. Aquarius is the next natural answer in the natural cycle to break apart that calcification with fresh new ideas, more objectivity. And if you think about it, that's a really painful process to go through if that calcification has become so thick that, as you've put it before, the womb is the tomb is just interesting because it can become this very hardened tomb of thought and perception that we get stuck in. And even the mere thought of thinking differently, even if it is the truth, can be so painful that the reaction can be quite violent. So when you say that, this is going to be really hard for some women, and others who are more heroic, they'll take up what is necessary to do what they must. Those ones that can't handle it, I mean, they might even be watching this episode. They might have even been binge watching our series and hate watching it. And I'm just thinking, hey, if you're watching, those feelings you're having, that's the way out. You must feel everything that's coming up if you want to get out of this. Because no amount of hatred projected out into the world or onto others is going to help fix this. The next step, like with this Pluto and Aquarius, what's coming up is we're meant to be bringing up this sludge and looking at it square in the face for what it actually is, and that includes feeling it. So, just some commentary in
Yep.
response to what you're saying.
Brilliant. Yep. And I think that another little law is that start with something small.
Oh yes, yeah.
If it feels overwhelming, which it
Mm,
obviously is,
mm,
then just start with something that you can have control over, which is to make sure that your daughters do not abuse sexuality and beauty. Make sure that they start to admire and respect men. Right? That is healing the real poison in the blood in the now. Because although we're talking about the ancient past, and although we are talking about the atavistic history, there's something very special about the now moment.
mhm.
This is the place to heal. You start now, and it creates a reverberation down through the past. There's nothing else you can do. You just say the buck stops here. And you start with things that are in your control. And you make sure that your children go nowhere near these toxic teachers, these toxic women in classes who are all sold out to the woke agenda. So even if you have to private school, or do something along those lines, you just got to keep them insulated from these toxic. Because remember, this problem we're talking about has become institutionalized. That's what adds to the difficulty.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm. And even
Just don't
looking for
let them.
heroes too. Maybe even just
Oh,
connecting with heroic imagos could be a step to take too. That could be
that's
very
huge.
helpful. Yeah.
That's huge. That's absolutely huge. This is to do with the ego ideal,
Mhm.
which is one of the most important things. Again, it's within your control to do that. And this includes heroic men, images that women, daughters, young children need to be able to identify with. This will help reinforce, and create this immunity so that when the woman goes out, the girl goes out into the world, she's less likely to be contaminated by this vile stuff. But it's all to do with parenting. It's radical. So we don't underestimate the difficulty of it, but at the same time, the human being can start small. Don't get overwhelmed. Just start with something small. Introduce them to the works of Ayn Rand, right? Says that when asked what it is that you try to achieve with your work, she goes, I am a worshiper of men. I mean, what an incredible statement. So there's your counterbalance. There's your antidote. There's your antidote. It's really kind of simple.
Mm.
And in doing that, you bring forth other hidden powers that support that, from the moral universe. And most importantly, the moment that you do that, you're putting blood on the door to keep her away. Right? There's a vampire out there, or it's actually in there. But this is one of these things you can do to keep that being away from your door. And that is of paramount importance. Because there's a certain psychic balance that has been knocked for six a long time ago with all of this. The more and more that the masculine archetype is violated, the more and more that creates an imbalance in which other archetypes, you see, will come to rectify, right? Come to its aid, but they do so in a demonic form, a daemonic form, an antagonistic form. And so women have long ago awakened this. The evidence is actually quite obvious. So it's a breach on this typological level. Masculine and feminine are out of balance. Now, I've gone to great lengths in my work to show how the figure of the terrible mother is central to how this even happened in the first place. So I've contributed to that in my books, Dragon Mother and Adultism, and many articles, because that's a key part, which breeds matrophobia and many other things, where young daughters are actually encouraged to go into the world, later on, and abuse sexuality and beauty. They're encouraged. And this can happen at what is known as the phallic stage, at the Oedipal stages, where a male child will be often arrested from achieving, this psychosexual level, the phallic, because the mother's threatened by his independence. So she tries to withhold that child, and that amounts to a kind of feminization of the male child. And it can also happen to a daughter. But usually if the daughter is even slightly pretty, there's another syndrome that comes along, which is the mother encourages her to go into the male world and exploit it to get what she wants. It's a terrible thing. And it's no different, a kind of arrestation. It's still arresting that girl's development. It's still a form of castration, actually, strangely. I know that comes across as strange to people, but it's actually a kind of castration. And you're making that woman dependent. And you're also making them seethe with rage within, because they're raging at themselves for not fighting back against the terrible mother and her influence. And they're also hating themselves for being immoral, because morality is not just rooted in the will to power, like Nietzsche thought. Morality is rested in the moral universe, in your conscience, something he knew nothing about. Right? It's rested in existential guilt for living the inauthentic life. And you're certainly living an inauthentic life when you misuse your sexuality and beauty. So the girl is riddled with guilt. And then in order, in her teenage years, to mollify that, she's found the ultimate way that most other women endorse, which is to continually blame the man for his sexual needs and his lecherousness, or whatever it might be, his violence. Mm. When all along you're violating nature, because nature's created it that way. Man wants to procreate. That's his job. That's what he wants. That's what he's doing. Right? So the whole thing is rooted in an actual hatred of nature. And this is the thing I'm telling you, then awakens the natural force in this antagonistic, malefic, and demonic form. And then when that gets in here, when it moves inside a woman, it throws up, we've talked about this before, remember, various images. And it has its own terrifically interesting way. You might think you're seeing images of Jesus or some other beneficent image. Yep. Keep going. Not going to stop you. There's all sorts of ways that this incredible force works. Don't even want to go into it.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, I think this has been, wow, I'm really glad with the part two. This part two has really knocked a lot of information just like right out of the park. I think people will get a lot out of this. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we conclude?
No. Thank you very much for doing this, reading these slides so brilliantly. And yeah, it's just been a pleasure.
Oh, well, same here. And thanks everyone for watching. I'm looking forward to more. So we'll see you again next time. And with that, we bring this episode of The Dark Side of the Female Psyche to a close. There's still more to come in this series, so make sure you're subscribed to Willfully Evolving Woman here on YouTube and turn on your notifications so that you'll know when the next episode is ready. More social media accounts may be added in due time, so if that interests you, bookmark willfullyevolvingwoman.com and be sure to check back periodically. If you would like to follow Michael and learn more from him, you can find his works through the following channels: dragonmother.org, femalepsychology.org, and of course, michaeltsarion.com. And if you're interested in Michael's premium presentations and the Unslaved podcast, you can find those by becoming a member at unslaved.com or unslaved.substack.com. I'm Sarah DeHaven, and on behalf of Michael and myself, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.